Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Richard and welcome back to another stock market outlook video. As usual, we'll go through the price action of the major indexes, the leading stocks in the market, the potential true market leaders. Then we'll talk about how my previous watches performed, as well as check in on the sentiment surveys I post on Twitter, as well as a few surveys from IBD. And also this week, I'll also be talking about the NAAIM exposure index, as well as the big picture, and of course the GMI signal from wishingoutball.com. And then at the end of the video, we'll put all that information together and determine what the current trend of the market is. And I'll also talk about how I'm managing my own personal portfolio next week. So make sure you guys leave a like down below on the video and subscribe if you're new to the channel, and let's get started. So getting right into it, let's go back to the indexes and first take a look at the QQQ on a weekly basis. And let's get rid of the drawings just for now. And overall, you can see it was a very strong week, up 3.57%. You had a nice weekly closing range of 95.4% and a daily closing range on Friday of 83.7%. And overall, you can see a strong close right under the top of the trading range. So the expectation from this is we either go sideways or up. And going now to the IWM, the Russell 2000 index, you can see we had a negative week down 1.58% with a poor weekly closing range of 22.7% and a daily closing range on Friday of 47.6%. And overall, we finished in the lower third of the trading range, so the expectation is sideways or down. And taking a look at the SPY, you can see we had an up week of 0.78%, a weekly closing range of 94.7%, and a daily closing range on Friday of 88.9%. So from this bar, the expectation is we go sideways or continue up. And taking a look at stage analysis, you can see we're finally above a rising 30-week moving average, so we are currently in a stage 2 uptrend, and we're also in a yellow band pattern rising above a 10-week and 30-week moving average. But on the IWM, we're still in a stage 1 because we are above a declining 30-week moving average. And on the QQQ, we are currently still in a stage 2 uptrend as we have been for many weeks in a row. So those are the major indexes, and going through a couple more, you can see XLF, we're currently just above a declining 30-week moving average. So really not nice action right here. And we're also below this resistance point as well. So I would definitely stay away from XLF. In the financials at this point, they are definitely laggards. And moving on to the Dow Jones, you can see that we had a down week, although it almost had a reversal, down 0.18% with a weekly closing range of 78% and a daily closing range of 88%. So overall, the expectation is sideways or higher. And moving on, we've got the VIX, the volatility index. And overall in the week, we did have a slight gain of 2.22%, but overall, we are still in an overall downtrend at this time. And moving on, we've got the FFTY, the Innovator IBD 50 ETF, and overall growth stocks did pretty well last week, up 1.8%, and we had a weekly closing range of 67% and a daily closing range of 70.6%. So the expectation is we go sideways or up from this week. And lastly, taking a look at GLD or gold, you can see we had an ugly bar right here where we tried to move up, but then we're knocked down. And overall, we had a poor weekly closing range of 17.5%, but we had an okay daily closing range this past Friday of 66.7%. So those are the major ETFs on a weekly time frame. And now let's take it day by day on the QQQ. And first things first, we're still well within this channel right here that we've been in throughout the majority of this move. And currently we have about 3% to the upside and 3% to the downside in between these two lines. And overall, you can see on this Monday, we had a gap up, then a move lower almost to the close of the previous day. But in the end, we closed right near the top of the trading range, which is very positive. And that momentum carried on into Tuesday, where we had a very similar day, a gap up, a move down towards the area of the close of the previous day, but then a strong close in the end. Then on Wednesday, we had a negative day, and you can see volume was higher on the QQQ, and I believe this was a distribution day on the NASDAQ, and we finished right near the low of the trading range. Then moving on to Thursday, you can see we had a bullish outside day, meaning the low was below the low of the previous day, and we closed right above the high of the trading range of the previous day. And that momentum carried on over into Friday, where you can see we had higher volume on the QQQ, and overall we opened pretty much flat and closed in the upper half and upper third of the trading range. And so the expectation from this bar is we go sideways or higher. So that is the QQQ on the daily. And one last thing about the indexes, you can see on the SPY that we actually closed at a new all-time high, which is pretty impressive given this very fast recovery after the massive crash. So I think that is definitely very bullish for this market. And that pretty much covers the indexes. So moving on to the potential true market leaders and sorting by that weekly change, you can see most of them were green on the week, and the top performers were Tesla, Zoom, and SE, which reported earnings. And overall, we had a strong performance and a lot of charts really improved over the course of the week. We had Fastly making some gains off the 50-day moving average. We had CrowdStrike moving up. We had Fiverr making a move as well. And a lot of these charts are healing and potentially setting up breakouts from the kind of second stage bases that they're forming. And we did have some losers on the week. You can see that SEDG pretty much went flat. TTD didn't too much either, really just hanging in right near the 21 EMA. So this could be actionable next week if it starts to move up and takes out this kind of intraday high right here, this resistance pivot at about 484. Infi Corp also is now below the 50-day moving average, which is a big negative. You can see that this rally attempt is pretty lackluster. And ENPH as well. Solar in general didn't do too much last week. QDEL moved up slightly, although it's finding support at this 50-day moving average. Chegg as well had a big move down and now is pretty much hanging in at its 21 EMA. And this could be actionable if it takes out this point of resistance right here at 82.07. So those are kind of the laggards from this past week. Amazon had a nice break of the downward trend line, and this was on my watch list. But really the big news this week was Tesla as it broke the 2K mark. And I think this chart is very cool to look at on an intraday basis because there's really the signs of significant accumulation because it moves up, then it goes flat and sideways as nobody wants to sell, and then it has big jumps on volume coming in. So even though you want to make most of your sell and buy decisions based on a daily chart or even weekly chart, it's very cool to look intraday and see how the kind of supply and demand mechanics are at play on any given day. So I think that was cool to see, and hopefully this continues to move up. I did sell a little bit into strength up here because it was a very overweight position, but still this is my biggest position. I think I have 15% or so of my portfolio in this one stock. So hopefully it continue to make some gains for us into next week. So that is Tesla, and moving on, let's talk about my previous watch list. And overall, this wasn't the greatest performance from my weekly watch list, but we did have some decent winners. LL, which I bought at $23.99 on the breakout, has moved up quite well. Fiverr as well is moving up from this downward trendline break. Adobe had a nice breakout and move on this past Thursday, although it consolidated on Friday. SAM really is making a move here, breaking out into new all-time highs with a strong weekly closing range right here. And you can see it's 100% and 100%, exactly what you hope to see. Ali as well broke out through the downward trend line, but it's just been moving up and down, and it does have earnings relatively soon. We talked about Amazon a little bit. It broke the downward trend line beautifully, and hopefully this continues into early next week. AMD, which I posted about on Twitter, I did buy it on this day right here, so hopefully it can continue its gains next week. And it had a nice reversal bar as well as a green dot and blue dot on that day. Moving on, we also have Pins, which had a false breakout right here, but it was a downside reversal, which is definitely a yellow flag. And overall, I did try to add on to my shares as it was breaking out, but then I ended up selling those and selling another half of my position on this day just to lower my overall exposure. I can always add back to my position. You can see it is kind of setting up again, potentially a green dot early next week, and the Bollinger Bands are squeezing at this time. Next up, we've got TTWO, which is pretty much going sideways. CLH tried to break out, but then got knocked down on Thursday and Friday. TSM was a loser for me. You can see I tried to buy on this green dot as it was right near the downward trend line, but it couldn't hold it and actually gapped down towards its 21 EMA, and I sold it on this day because it broke my stop loss, but it could be actionable if it breaks its downward trend line once again. And next up, we've got LRN, which never really presented a buy point, and it looks like it wants to bounce off its green line right here, which is right near its 50-day as well. So if it does meet those two potential support areas, that could be a setup right there. And UCT tried to break out, but then really broke down throughout the end of last week. So with that said, let's go over to the sentiment surveys that I post on Twitter. And overall, you can see we had a big jump this week up to 54.6% bullish, which is a negative for me because this is kind of getting in the danger area. So that is one thing to keep in mind. And taking a look at the put call ratio, you can see we're still at 0.65, so a little bit too low for my liking. And looking at the bulls versus bears poll from Investors Intelligence, we're about 60% bulls and about 16.5% bearish. So hopefully we can get a quick move down, some fear into this market, and then move up once again. And one more secondary indicator that I'm adding to my process is the NAAIM Exposure Index, which basically gives a sense of how active money managers are managing their accounts. And a number near 100 is way too bullish. So once again, I hope we can get a quick flush downwards and we can lower this number along with the other psychological indicators. But moving on, let's take a look at the big picture article from Investors Business Daily. And the headline reads, NASDAQ hits another high as 3 big stocks give index a boost. And reading through, they talk about how overall declining stocks led advancers by a 2-to-1 ratio, but the 3 big stocks, Apple, Nvidia, and Tesla, all had nice gains this past Friday. And overall, they talk about how Tesla's weight on the indexes is growing, and they also talk about the strength in the home builders. So there's a couple stocks mentioned in here that could be worth taking a look at. And looking at the market pulse, you can see that Friday's action was tech stocks lead market. Current outlook is still a confirmed uptrend, and we now have 3 distribution days on the NASDAQ and 2 on the S&P 500. And moving on to the GMI signal, you can see it's still green since April 27th, and you can see that the GMI score is a strong 5 out of 6. So all in all, my view is we are still in a confirmed uptrend, and I will be looking to add positions to my portfolio. But it is definitely worth keeping in mind that the kind of sentiment is getting a bit overheated at this time, especially the NAAIM exposure index. So make sure you are managing your risk accordingly and kind of trimming those stocks that are getting very extended. So that's pretty much it for the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please remember to leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. And I'll see you guys in future videos.